10 years ago, I launched SunCast from a tiny call booth after hours, my main job, recording over Skype, if anybody remembers that service, with a young analyst named Adam James, at a company many of you probably remember, Green Tech Media. Today, he's back. He's now a partner at Energy Impact Partners, and he is still an original solar warrior. We're going to talk about what's next, how climate capital is maturing, how great teams get built, and how even fatherhood changes the way we lead. Stick around. This one is part reunion, part roadmap for the next decade of clean energy. Hey, welcome back to SunCast, and thank you for giving us the only non-renewable resource you've got. That, of course, is your time. Today is a special episode. I am your host, Nico Johnson, as I have been for the last decade. My promise today is that I'm going to take amazing care of the time that you invest here, as we have for nearly 900 episodes over the last 10 years. Yes, this is our 10-year reunion episode. And 10 years ago, I recorded the very first episode on how the Latin America solar market was evolving. I recorded it with one of my then dear friends in the solar industry, a guy named Adam James. He was a young analyst at Green Tech Media and was going to be my co-host for what would have been the Latin America Solar Report podcast, because I was just stealing ethically from his GTM report. But as fate would have it, Adam was soon to depart from GTM. And instead of being my co-host, he agreed to come on and be our first guest. Back then, we were both still trying to find our place in the clean energy sector. A decade later, Adam is now a partner at EIP, Energy Impact Partners. Many of you know they're one of the best and biggest funds supporting climate tech in the world. They're helping scale innovations across utility and industry. He's also the co-founder of another organization that you probably are familiar with. He's now the board chair of CELI, Clean Energy Leadership Institute, which just welcomed a new executive director and continues to shape the next generation of leaders in clean tech. Today's conversation is not nostalgia. It's about what's next. We're going to explore how capital is evolving in climate tech. Adam's had a front row seat, a perch, if you will, on how exactly these investments are being made, what it means to build truly great teams, and yes, even fatherhood and how seasons of life can reshape how we lead. If you've been a part of this journey for any part of the last decade, I want to say thank you once again. And if you're new here, welcome to the tribe. My hope is that this episode leaves you inspired and equipped for the next 10 years of your own journey. Let's get right to it. Adam James, welcome back to SunCast.
Great to be here, Nico. Thanks for having me on. And it's a special opportunity to come back 10 years later.
So we had you on our 5th anniversary episode. I went back and looked this morning. It was episodes 300 and 301. And at the time, I remember we dug deep into kind of your newish role at EIP, then chief of staff, and kind of what that meant, taking on that role. I want to sort of wind the clock back, though, and think about you as the very first guest on SunCast. It was recorded, as I recall, like late summer of 2015. What's the first thing that comes to mind for you when you think about who we both were back then?
I mean, in terms of who I was, I would say that it was definitely a different time in my life and in my career. Mm-hmm. I think at that point, I had found my first niche, my first area where I really felt like I could contribute something meaningful. Which, as you pointed out, was the Latin America solar market. I was doing a lot of international market analysis around solar and learning a lot about different countries. But it was the first time I found something that I felt a real sense of ownership and expertise on. And so I do remember when I think about that period of time as feeling like it was the first time where I felt like I was kind of an expert, on something rather than just calling up other people who knew more than I did. And that was great. I mean, the thing that I always loved the most about that job, and it's actually where our relationship came from, was that a lot of doing that kind of analyst work is actually or I believe doing good analyst work is calling and talking to people and building relationships that are not transactional relationships. They're rooted in a genuine interest in what other people are doing. And so for all the modeling that you need to learn how to do, so much of it is informed by relationships. And so I think, the other thing that at that time was really active for me was so much of my time and energy was going into relationships,
Yeah.
And so I think that's the other thing I really think about at that time is just how much much energy went into just talking to and staying connected with and meeting with people, which, as you probably know, gets more and more difficult over time. So those are the big things that come to my mind.
I remember at one point just realizing, this guy whose job is to keep his finger on the pulse of the market keeps calling me. I guess that means I, in some way, represent some level of expertise in the market. And truthfully, when it dawned on me, frankly, that you and a few other analysts had been ringing me regularly, like building that rapport and relationship, that was when I finally realized, like, oh, I've developed something that people want. And I sit at a place in the market where few have insight, and therefore people are calling me and asking me questions. And I've told people a ton of times that I remember very specifically being in the Kawa Capital office, which was where we were running the Conergy offices out of, walking around in one of the, it must have been around 6 p.m. one evening. And I was walking around on the phone with you for what felt like the 100th time. And I said, Adam, we should have recorded this call. And you were like, wait, what do you mean? No, we can't record these calls. And I was like, no, we totally can. We need to pull back the veil on how all this works. That moment was the moment I decided that I had already decided I was going to launch a podcast, but that was when I realized, like, I'm not going to launch a kite surfing or some other podcast. I'm going to launch a podcast that actually pulls back the veil in the solar industry and how it all works. And the Latin American market where we had been working was, at the time, you had coined the fastest growing solar market in the world. And I really latched on to that and said, well, there needs to be somebody sort of doing the play-by-play on how this is working. And that ultimately became what is now SunCast, some 10 years and 870 something episodes ago. I remain so grateful that even at a time where you were going through sort of rapid professional growth and even uncertainty, it wasn't clear like what GTM would say or what your new incoming employer, Solar City, would say. It was very clear that you weren't going to be able to take on sort of a co-host role. But I remember the two of us jumping on Skype, and I was just like, I don't know what this is going to look like. So I'm just going to ask you a bunch of questions about your report. And over time, we've learned to sort of build our own narrative. I wonder if you think about 2015 Adam shadowing you for a week now in your current job. What do you think he'd be surprised about that your job actually looks like?
I think we might have talked about this a little bit on our last podcast, but the main thing probably over the last 5 years is just about how to use time. So I think the thing that I didn't really understand at that time is that I didn't really know how to prioritize, for example. So my concept of prioritization was just putting things in the order in which I was going to do them, right? And so often that would mean, okay, well, I'm deprioritizing this particular project, but that means what I'll be doing is I'll be doing it at 1 a.m., So I didn't really have the muscle memory around how to just say no to things or delegate things or make the tough choices about how to spend my time and energy. And fortunately, I had tons of time and energy, so I kind of got away with it. But I would say the thing that 2015 Adam would probably be shocked at now is just my willingness to much more deeply prioritize how I spend my time and energy, and, how to not do list things that are important and it's painful to not do them, and to make an active decision to not do them. And it's not just with my time now. I would say that also really plays an important part as a manager of teams, and thinking about how the team as a whole is spending its time and resources.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the thing that I didn't have any real experience with at that time, and that has become such an important thing now. The other, observation is kind of, thank goodness this wasn't just a Latin America solar podcast, because that would have been very short-lived, and that journey from being an expert in something, and that fortunately for both of us and for the world, a lot of that knowledge is really commoditized today. It's not there. It doesn't really matter if you know the exact number of megawatts in Mexico or whatever.
That's right.
Because solar has become mainstream, and it has become kind of conventional and boring. And thank God, right? Like that it is now just a much, much bigger thing. And so what felt niche and new and exciting, and what was niche and new and exciting, has changed. And so I think 2015 Adam would probably also be pleasantly surprised at how much things that I thought were sexy and exciting and new, fortunately, have been successful enough to just become kind of boring, which is great.
Indeed. It's fun kind of seeing how the market is ebbs and flows because in 2015, in fact, 2 months after I launched the podcast, Conergy, the company I worked for, shut down their Latin America team, right? For a lot of reasons, not least of which was oil cratered to down around $40 a barrel, which meant the traditional forms of generating electricity in Central and South America, namely bunker fuel and diesel, were now sustainable again. And we didn't have to come up with a lower cost solution. Just for reference, for those who are listening, in Panama, which was one of the better, sort of more open markets, the spot price for electricity got as high as $250 a megawatt. So like over 25 cents a kilowatt hour. It quickly dropped from there. But we were chasing a lot of interesting markets from Panama to the Dominican Republic to Colombia and Chile. And what I realized was, and I think what you saw as well in your career, was it was right at the inflection point where the U.S. solar market was really becoming a mature market. And a lot of us rightly recognized, like, oh, if I don't focus on the U.S. market in some way, I'm going to get left behind, right? Because I was seeing like 2-3 deals a month come through, whereas my counterparts in the U.S. are seeing 2-3 deals a day that they were vetting. And that pattern matching really becomes a quintessential component to the maturity of any person that wants to grow a business. And that's the thing I've given as advice to most people is like, if you are early in your career, you got to put yourself in not so far down the river that you have to wait a while for the flood to rise. Like you really got to get in a place where you can see as many data points as possible coming past you. I think that it's interesting because you've been able to do that your whole career. I feel like you've been able to get in a place where you are at the mouth of a very large funnel of information that comes through, so you can build that pattern matching. What other skills over the last decade have really helped you be able to position yourself as now a partner at EIP?
I would say finding that overlap between what is most important for a business, what it is that I am good at, and what matters not right now, but in 6 months. Those are probably the three ingredients. And so going to Solar City, for example, I think you could kind of look at that moment and say the US machine that they had built was going okay, right? The machine that was built, it was moving along. I wouldn't have probably joined in a capacity where I was just another piece of that machine.
Right.
But looking at that business and looking at the way it was interacting with the public market at the time, the kind of demands were for growth. And so you got to look and say, where is the growth opportunity? And so the idea of kind of coming in and helping spearhead an international development strategy, to me, that was a really good alignment between the first two things, which is what could be meaningful for this business, what will matter, and then what am I good at? Because I was bringing some of that knowledge into the table.
Right.
But the last piece of it, which is like kind of what's going to matter in six to 12 months, is also important because I think companies move pretty quickly, and so sometimes by the time you've joined, to do the thing that really mattered to them when they started the interview process, I'm not actually always that convinced that will continue to matter for as long as you want it to. And so you have to some extent, look at where that company might be going. And so like doing international development work, for example, for Solar City did not matter right away at all, but over the course of 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, it started to really matter a lot more and get a lot more oxygen. And I think that's really the thing to look at. And I had a similar thoughts at Tesla, similar approach at EIP. And in all those cases, I think there was also probably an element of the stage, and I didn't do this deliberately, but the stage of those different companies, even a company as large as Solar City or as large as Tesla, have little pockets within them that are still kind of operating like a seed stage startup. And I actually have found that that's where when I hop in, where I actually
that's where you thrive,
kind of create the most value. Yeah.
To that end, Adam, when you jumped into EIP, there were still a lot of, as I understand or have come to understand it over the last decade with you, of sort of watching you grow into these roles, like precisely when you jumped into EIP, there were still a lot of things kind of unformed for the kind of company that EIP aspired to be. And you helped grow EIP from startup VC to billion-dollar platform. It's fun to be able to say that more than one of those exists now in the space. What have you learned about building an institution inside of an industry that is very much still emerging?
I think a lot of folks who join venture, no matter what role they join in, are often angling to get into investment. And I would say that's one thing that I can conclusively say I'm not that interested in. I don't want to be selling money, which is at the end of the day, a lot of what venture capital is about, is convincing the best founders to take your check. I'm really interested in building scalable systems to actually build great businesses. And that was what I have really been the most passionate about, what I am the most passionate about at EIP, which is coming in and seeing this opportunity at EIP, which at the time was a $500-ish million fund, to really grow that business. But that in order to do that, you have to build a lot of internal infrastructure to make that successful, and as some of it is the stuff that it's not going to grab any headlines. It's about, building out good practices for talent and HR. It's about learning how to hire. It's about learning how to do performance management, how to set goals, how to cascade those goals down within a business. And it is sometimes also bringing vision into operations. So understanding what this business needs to look like in a year, and what are the things that you have to do today in order to make that possible, and work yourself backwards. And I'd say that's been the skill that I have been, I don't know if it's a skill really, the thing that I have got that has been the most valuable often is just being able to work backwards from where we need to be to what we need to do today, and what are all the steps that we have to do in order to get there. And I feel really passionate about that, and about the intersection of people and processes, because I think that's the other thing that sometimes gets missed, is that there's some folks who are really, really good with people, but they don't understand how to build processes, and everything in their business is just too flexible, right? They're like a reed that's getting like batted around in the tide. And then you've got folks who are too rigid on their processes and don't understand people. And they are like, the mighty oak that as soon as a storm comes in, they just get knocked down because it's too rigid. People cannot adhere to it. And so you have to kind of be like bamboo, right? Where there's sturdiness, it's stable, but there's enough flexibility. And a lot of that is about understanding enough about people to build things that work for them. And that's just the area that I really have kind of developed the most passion for, because, you can have the best product in the world, but if you cannot deliver it effectively, it does not matter how good your idea is.
I'm curious about the sort of the evolution of system building for you. How did it look early on, and how has it matured for you? Because I think it's easy for folks to hear like, oh, I build systems, and have intellectual assent to like kind of, I think I know what that means. And perhaps it looks different for EIP than it does for one of the tech startups that you've invested in. But generally speaking, a lot of the listeners here and viewers are very much interested in either scaling a venture they're working for, or jumping out and starting something on their own. What do systems look like in an organization that is primed for scale?
First, I have to give some credit. I've read a lot of these business books, most of which are total garbage. There's one that I have found is really, really good on these questions. It's called Scaling People, from the COO at Stripe. And it's very tactical, which is really great. But if I could have every single person running a business read one book, it would be Scaling People. And just, when I was reading through it, it echoed, 85% of it echoed my experience, and the other 15% did a great job of just laying out some things that were the next level of what I should be thinking about. So I will say that I think that's a fantastic resource.
That's Claire Hughes Johnson, right?
That's right.
Kudos, yep. Another brilliant Johnson in the world.
Yes. Yeah.
Keep going.
So I would say, whether it's coming into a team or coming into a company, I have a pretty similar approach. Mm-hmm. The first is to go in and kind of just do the audit. I would say I am shocked, and maybe most people will wind up being shocked, that 99% of the fixes or changes or things that need to be done, people already know and will just tell you what they are.
Right.
The problem is that they are used to business as usual. They don't have a forum to raise those topics. And so you get a little bit of a bump by being new and fresh and coming in and just asking questions. Or if you're McKinsey, you get paid $4 million to do that, right? And use your watch to tell you what time it is. But you first step is just kind of to come in and understand, genuinely understand, ask smart questions, figure out how things click together today, how they work today. There's a second piece to that, which I've started doing more of over the last few years, which is really understanding the people better and what motivates them, what they're good at, what they're frustrated by. And I think that becomes part of the picture that you need to have emerging in your mind of where things are at today. The next is to kind of audit the existing processes that are in place. And often, especially in a fast-growing company, what will happen is you will incrementally add lots and lots and lots of new things over time that if you step back and look at them all in aggregate, they don't really make that much sense anymore. They're not the most streamlined way to do something anymore. And so I think going in and just with the principle of simplify and to simplify around what is most important, that is really critical. The next part is around kind of data transparency and reporting. I think it's tempting to try to get 100 KPIs, and that is just not what matters. What you need to be really good at is figuring out what KPIs really matter, and also just what data do people need to see in order to make better decisions. When you're in a fast-growing company, so much time is lost just trying to find something, find the thing that you need in order to do the thing you need to do. And everyone's best efforts around internal wikis and intranets and using Notion and all of that, they get out of date so fast. And so developing certain flashpoints within the business where everybody can get on the same page, whether that's, printing a report that gets posted every Monday, things like that just put the information really squarely in front of people so that they can make better decisions. And then the last one is, you kind of have to build the church for Easter Sunday a little bit. Like, you might not be at that stage of your company today, but what is it going to look like on your busiest day of next year? And do you have what you are going to need to have in place in order to accommodate that busiest day of the year? And of course, it's good to build in some flexibility, but when Easter Sunday rolls around, if the line's going around the block, and you're turning people away, you will probably regret at some point not doing a little bit more legwork to expand the capacity that you've got in the church. And so those are some of the things. And I think that's why there's such a premium on hiring experience, because experience just means you've already done a lot of those things. And so you can come in on day one and know it. But I wouldn't over-index on experience either, because all experience isn't necessarily good experience. And I think a lot of these things are figure-outable if you really have time and intentionality about them.
I have learned over the last maybe 2 to 3 years more about growing a startup than I did in the first 6 or 7. It's so interesting, given the fact that, I've been sort of running this business now for 7, 8 years. The first 2 years were kind of me figuring out whether or not I really wanted to do this side hobby and turn it into something. I've said a lot of times that another Adam Larner, came to me in 2019 and said, dude, you got to get your head straight. Like, SunCast is a thing and you are the head of it, and everybody sees it as your brand, not this other stuff that you're doing. And so kind of 2019 to now, so call it 6.5 years, I've been really all in, dedicated to try and build something that look like a business. 2021-ish, around the end of 2020, I realized, I remember very much in the fall of 2020, kind of coming across this term of like a productized service. And it baffles me now that it was 2020. Like, it feels like that was so recent to have finally discovered the notion of a productized business. But I think that a lot of, like you said, a lot of businesses are so busy wasting time trying to find what to do. I think that you really accurately said that. A lot of folks look on the outside and think, oh, these folks got it figured out. And you get inside a business and they really very much don't have it figured out. There are a bunch of smart people who decided to get on the bus together, like Jim Collins said, and like figure out how to pool resources. And I think that one of the things that I wanted to just kind of pressure test with you is this idea of like, who do you get on the bus? Because I've seen really smart people recruited into businesses that nearly ruin the culture. And I've seen really unintelligent people who who have like loyalty and energy in spades, but they don't have like a high EQ or a high IQ. And it's hard to know, like, what do you solve for? Because if you go try to get the very best in the industry who could just bolt on everything they've seen and done for other companies, like, yeah, you could probably grow. You would probably max out and like not have a facility that's ready for Easter Sunday because you'll have more people interested in coming than you have capacity for receiving them, especially if you focus on sales. So how do you see your entrepreneurs in the portfolio balancing this growth metric? And maybe there's something to be learned from this book, Scaling People, because I'm definitely going to go read that, and we'll link to it in the show notes. Have you guys talked much about that, or kind of give me some insight on how you have thought about that over the last decade as you've observed companies that certainly have different dynamics internally, that versus that of like going and pulling in the very best people versus building a culture and like around energy and loyalty to a thing versus just like the altar of growth.
What you spend your time on really does matter. And what I mean by that is whether it's performance management or hiring or building scalable operations, if you're spending less than 20% of your time on it, I do not in my heart believe you can do a good job. And so that's why I've gotten so much more brutal about how I spend my time. I've learned that the 5% is sometimes worse than the 0%. And I think a lot of the systemic problems you see in high growth companies really boil down to that question of what is getting the most time. When it comes to performance management, for example, and trying to get the best out of the people that you have, there are lots of folks who get to the position they're in because they're really great at their job. It does not mean that they're great managers of people. And it takes real time, even if you're a very naturally talented manager of people, to actually build the muscle memory and the systems and the thinking around how to really be an excellent manager of people and of teams. And I think that is not less than 20%. So, and to put that in real terms, that means 1 out of every 5 days you are at work, 100% of that day is being spent on like people management and performance management. So, and I think that same thing is true with hiring. And I think that same thing is true with what we were talking about before with operations. I have a rule of thumb where, I use OKRs generally or kind of top 3 priorities, that kind of thing. And one of those 3 or 4 priorities has to be infrastructure and investing in better infrastructure. It is an evergreen priority item. That means it has to be getting at least 20% of my time all the time. And talent and hiring, which is what you were asking about, falls into this category as well. I cannot tell you the number of times at different jobs that I've had where somebody showed up, even when I was interviewing, when somebody showed up and it was clear that they had not thought about it at all, opened their calendar, they got an interview, they pop on, they ask a bunch of questions, and then we move on. And I think you can't really believe in your heart that doing that is going to land you the best people, right? So we have to bring a lot more intentionality into hiring. And my answer for your question on, well, what should these things do you optimize for, you choose, is that you do not optimize for one or the other. You do not choose between the two. You take the extra time you need to find the right person because it is worth the extra time to find the right person. And for me, I have nowadays my kind of standard interview template, about 0% of it has anything to do with the job, the technicalities of the job that they're being hired for. For that, I rely heavily on case studies. It is 100% an evaluation of their ability to perform in the job. And so I have a set of questions that each of them maps over to a specific thing that I'm trying to better understand about them and about their capacity to do the work. And just to give you some examples, taking responsibility. I have learned that is one of the most important things to have, at least in the teams that work for me, is somebody who fully takes responsibility for something and runs it all the way to the ground. So one of the first questions that I ask is, tell me about the last time you made a big mistake and what did you do about it? And the number of times where people tell me a story about how somebody else made a mistake is shocking. Or the number of times somebody tells me about they take a second to try to figure out what's a mistake that wasn't really that bad, that wasn't really a mistake, that I can call a mistake and share in this interview, is shocking. And the right answer to that question is that really good, top performing people, their last mistake is burned on the inside of their eyelids. They don't even pause a minute They say, oh, last week I sent this thing out without checking it, and I had to call up and apologize to the client, right? We all make mistakes. If you're a high-performing person in a fast-paced job, you've made a mistake in the last 2 weeks. And if you do not remember it, then you're not, then you haven't really learned to take responsibility. So I have a set of like 20 questions like that are teaching me something very specific about the person that I feel like I need to know in order to have them on my team. And I leave all the technical stuff for the case.
I love the pucker factor going up and up on this episode. It's so good. Oh man, that is brilliant. I have so many things I want to drill down on here, but one of them is, how do you ensure that 20% priority in your calendar around hiring and people and culture?
Yeah. I mean, now I would say it's much more than, right, for me personally right now, it is much more than 20% of my time is people, whether that's hiring or most of it today, which is performance management and making sure we set clear goals. I mean, I have some rules of thumb. I try to not have any more than 50% of any day booked in meetings. I try to make sure that I see people in person once a week at least. That we keep a weekly check-in.
What does that mean, see people in person? Like internal?
Like face-to-face time. Yeah. Internal. See the people who report to me, internally, at least once a week.
Right.
Have 2-hour work blocks scheduled into my calendar to do
every
that
day?
kind of deep work that I need to do. Not every day, but that needs to be in there a few times a week.
Yeah.
And so with those kind of parameters, then it gets a little bit easier to stay focused on the things that really matter the most.
Right.
So those are the kind of blocking and tackling calendar.
That's helpful.
Answers to that.
Is there any particular? So it seems like you've cultivated a really keen sort of system for hiring. Have you leaned on any things like top grading or other similar sort of? I hesitate to call them templates or processes, but like you mentioned, the book Scaling People, from the very beginning, we love sort of giving people guideposts. Are there any around culture and hiring that you would point to that have been instrumental in helping you?
I would say I'm still experimenting is my answer, and it's possible that different things matter at different times also. So
imagine that.
what matters to me today might not actually have even worked a year ago,
right? Because
teams mature. So I have a team where 100% of the team has joined in the last 12 months, and the way that I think about management there is very, very different than with another team that I oversee that all have been here for over a year, right?
Yeah.
So it really does. I think it probably varies a bit. I had at one point this template that I'll send over. It was it was a tweet about what makes a great CEO.
Oh, nice.
And I put it into a template format for myself because I realized it's actually just a great framework for how to think about being a good leader and manager in general. And some of the things that it had on there, for example, about what a CEO's job is your job is setting the vision, getting the teams the resources they need in order to be successful. It was things like that. I kind of walked through those, and I'd say that's really become a template more for me personally, where I think about what is my job. My job is, number one, to set a clear vision, which I try to do collaboratively with the team. What really matters for us? How does what we do tie into making the company successful, and make sure everyone really understands and buys into that? What are the key things we need to do in order to get there? Having everybody buy in on that. And then my job is make sure that you have got the resources in order to be successful at that. And that is unblocking problems that you have. It is a service position to be in leadership. It is my job is to help other people to be successful. At the same time, because I take that so seriously, if people are not able to be successful because they're either not up to the job, or because they're not a good fit, or because they're not trying, I don't have any problem with moving on from those people, because I think there's some amount of laziness in just letting people go when you haven't really worked hard to help them to be successful.
Right.
And I definitely don't believe in that, but I do believe that when you put in all this work to try to make people successful, then you have to be more honest with yourself and move on if it's not working.
You do oversee internally and externally strategic partnerships and the impact overall of energy impact partners. I'm curious, if there is one or maybe a couple of KPIs that you watch that show you that those partnerships are really moving the needle.
Yeah, I don't want to get too much into the weeds on what those metrics are, but what I would say is that the idea of building strong partnerships, I think, is a place where over the last few years we have around 50 metrics that we look at, and then part of what I have really spent more time on is that question that you just asked, which is which of these matter, and then the follow up to that is that how are these metrics connected to each other, and how does one drive the other? Because I think one thing where my jury is still out is whether or not you should be building goals around leading or lagging indicators or some combination of the two when it comes to metrics. And there's an argument to be made, I think, that you should really only have outcome-based goals, meaning everything is a lagging indicator, and that a good manager then is bringing all the leading indicators into the way they do people management, but not necessarily team management. So you have to be a little bit more disciplined about driving those down at the personal level. And a good example of this in another type of business might be, there's a sales goal for dollars of contracts signed at the team level. But at the individual level is where you focus in on questions like building pipeline, right? But then at the end of the year, what really matters most is hitting the outcome-based goals. So that's one thing that I'm still in some amount of debate about. I've got a blend of leading and lagging at the team level right now, but I think there's probably a few different models on how to do that well.
Where do you feel good venture platforms break as they scale? And how do you design around that?
Venture itself is inherently hard to scale because the problems that early stage companies face, while they are somewhat similar in kind, are very different in practice. So maybe the best way to explain this is through like a contrast. So when you have a big private equity fund, I think a lot about like Vista Equity Partners. They're like, we only invest in software companies with X $100 million in revenue and whatever.
Right.
And so they invest in those companies and they have full ownership of those companies, or control of those companies rather. And they come in and they've got a playbook of exactly what has worked with every company like that before. And they can go in and apply their playbook and run their playbook and kind of move on. And so everything is that is a scalable business and a scalable business model in the kind of world of private equity, larger ticket private equity. Venture is really, really, really difficult to do that exact same thing in. Because first of all, your fishing area is probably wider than what folks like Vista Equity have. You might say, like we do, we're investing in companies across the energy transition. And that means we might be looking at seed, Series A, Series B, Series D, all the way up to much larger ones. So that's not very standardized. And then, you've got individual startups who are just trying to figure out what accounting software to use at their seed stage. And that actually is the number one thing the CEO is trying to figure out that week, right?
Yeah.
And so, but you multiply, think about all the decisions that you have had to make as a somebody who's starting a business, Nico, and then there's probably 200 decisions you've had to sort your way through. Each one has required all this work. And that is kind of venture too, right? Venture's job ideally should be to help with all those things. So in that way, it's kind of very, very difficult to scale because it is, you get investors and who get in the trenches with a founder and try to build a great business there. But not much of it is really something that you can break out into playbooks, especially if you're investing across different stages and across different types of companies, like product companies, service companies, project companies.
What should a CEO founder expect from a good investor?
Well, I think it depends on the investor's background a little bit. I think if you have an investor who's a former operator, what you should expect from them is that they can bring some of their experience into what they're telling you.
Yeah.
If you have an investor who is not a former operator, most of what you're leaning on is their pattern recognition across many companies like yours. But I do think you need to understand that they have not been in the trenches at a certain level. So you just have to shape what you're looking for with those two types of investors a little differently, I think.
How do I know how much I should be spending time with the investor, sharing information with the investor to be able to glean that operational or pattern matching expertise?
really depends on the investor. I mean, you've got, what is it, Founders Fund, and they just write a check and then they never really talk to you ever again. Like they believe in like, find great founders, give them money, stay out of the way. That's kind of their model. And then you've got venture investors who are much more involved, much more heavily involved, whether that's in business development or something else that's a value-added service. So, it probably scales along with those things. And there's some kind of a matrix, I'm sure, here, a 4x4 on, do they offer any services? Yes or no? And then are they actually any good at delivering what they say they can deliver? Yes or no? Right. And if you have an investor who's the top right box, who's offering services and is good at delivering those services, then you should probably spend some real time with them. But if they're offering services and they're not very good at delivering them, you should probably politely find a way to spend a little less time with them.
You've mentioned a couple of times, great founder. I wonder if there are sub-bullets that identify for you or me. Like, what does it look like to see a great founder?
So if you're a CEO, one of the most important things is just to understand what you're the absolute best at, and then also identify how to find the person who is the best at the things that you are not the absolute best at. And I think that's the real ingredient for success. We've got one CEO in our portfolio who I feel like has been unbelievable at this. And this is a huge part of why that company has been so successful. And for me, it applies to us even at the individual level. I have some things that I'm pretty good at, but if it's something that our team needs in order to be successful or our company needs in order to be successful, my job is to go out and find the person who is the absolute best at that. That's a big part of what I have to do. And I think that's something that CEOs struggle with. The other thing is knowing what matters at what stage of company. And so this is where it can get really tough, because it's possible that as a CEO, you found the right person for the right job at that stage. But as the company grows, the expectations need to change. And so I think that's the other thing that is really important, is to be able to be spending enough time on performance management and having that vision for your company. Do you know how to get the right people for the right job at the right time also?
Yeah.
And I think that's another real factor in success when it comes to the talent side.
Yeah. Do you see any patterns of success in founders who survive post Series A?
A big part of it is what I just said, for sure.
Yeah.
Is that that's a lot of times Series A is your first big check. And so it's your first moment to bring in real talent, and also to have the look at the talent you already have and say, who can make the step up to where we are today? And, sometimes you're going to get that wrong, but I think, like I was saying earlier, experience isn't everything. Sometimes you've got somebody in your company who's been unbelievable, but their job has been finance and strategy and operations. And so after the Series A, you should not have three things in your title, So maybe that person needs to step up and just be your VP of operations. And maybe they'll do an amazing job of that. But you need to hire in a CFO, for example. Right. So I think that talent navigation of finding the right folks for the stage of company is at that moment is really, really critical. And then the other one is that it's usually also, depending on where the company's at, a lot of it's about scaling up the product. And so hopefully you have product market fit and you've raised around that. But no longer is it enough to have a good product. You have to get really into delivery and customer success and the feedback loop between customer success and sales and operations and building that flywheel. And I think that can be really tough, because it requires a lot more organization. And as we were saying at the top of the call, being a tiny bit more firm on how things actually work.
Can we take a few minutes on just your observations around climate tech? Because a lot of folks say even the word climate tech is dead. I think that EIP would say differently. You guys are investing across an entire spectrum that is wide and varied. I know that one of the things that we see and you all have embraced early is changing the vernacular, right? Like, you all don't invest in climate tech, you invest in energy transition. Kind of what's the state of the union right now on investing in decarbonization and climate solutions on the forefront of energy transition?
I'd say it's probably no surprise that the big topic right now is AI and load growth. And I don't want to waste your time and our listeners' time giving another podcast about the future of load growth with AI and all that, because I think if you haven't heard about it already, you kind of got to be living under a rock. But the piece of that I think really matters for the energy transition stuff is that it has created a real sense of urgency.
Right.
So the energy industry is tough to do business in and to scale companies in because the time cycles are so long.
Right.
And a knee-jerk reaction in the energy industry takes about 10 years. And so the idea of turning over all of these assets is really hard. And I think when the only thing we had as a pressure point for that was the idea that individual companies wanted to decarbonize, that might have been going a little bit slower because it was almost like this is something we want to do, not necessarily something that we have to do. Now, of course, a lot of us believe we do have to do it, right? Because the climate change is a major problem. But I'm just saying that every single person in every single position of leadership who is making decarbonization goals did not necessarily feel that it was something that they had to do, right?
Right.
And I think the difference with that and now is that now we're in a moment where we have to do a ton in order to capture the growth opportunity. If you are a utility CEO today, at no point in your career within a utility ever has there been a growth moment like the one that we are in right now. You are used to 1% to 3% growth, right? The last time we even had anything that was any real growth at all was, when we were connecting the grid for the first time back in the 60s and 70s. So it has been 50 years of basically being an executive operating in what is a low growth market. And you have a crop of CEOs now who are the first ever in history to actually have a real growth opportunity in front of them that they could grab a hold of and use to propel their companies into a totally new place. And I think that feels like urgency. And so how is that connected to energy transition? Well, it's going to require building a ton of new stuff. Nobody's building a new generation plant within the next 2 years. So how are we going to get all this stuff connected? I think that pushes a ton of pressure onto load flexibility, distributed generation, behind the meter solutions. And so I think that's the kind of urgency. And it's one of the reasons why I'm just not pessimistic at the moment. I'm still optimistic about where we're at as an industry. And I think the energy transition really in some ways has never had better fuel for its growth than what we've got going right now.
You mentioned to me in a call prepping for this that your personal goal is to become a top 1% manager of people. What does that look like in practice for you right now?
Well, to become a top 1% manager of people and teams, which I think is an important distinction.
Okay.
Because what it looks like for me right now is a lot of it is about time. So making sure that I am prioritizing the time to understand and work with individual people on my teams to do their absolute best work. And then the other part of that, becoming a top 1% manager of teams, is again about spending the time to make sure that I am doing those core roles that I mentioned earlier. Am I setting a clear vision? Am I acquiring the resources we need to be successful? Am I allocating resources and prioritizing effectively? Those are the main things that I'm really focused on. And I think with people management, you asked earlier about templates. I mean, the one that I have there is when I'm talking to people about career development, what we're talking about is how can you become top 1% for what you do? And that's the bar we're setting. We're not talking about what the expectations are for the role, even, which are obviously not to be a top 1%. Right. When we're talking about feedback, when we're talking about growth, when we're talking about those types of things, the context is how can you become top 1% for what you do? And I think that has been a really helpful forcing function to get those individual conversations with people anchored around things that really push them to be their absolute best.
How do you personally manage your progress towards being top 1%?
It's probably going to be mostly a gut check at the end of this year, I would say. I feel like if I have developed a set of, a playbook and a set of practices at the end of this year that I would feel comfortable sitting down on this podcast with you and talking through and saying, I've really put myself behind these. Like I stand by these. I think these are really, really solid.
Yeah.
I think that's a good sign that I'm getting. I don't think I will actually achieve top 1% this year, but that's will be a good sign. And I think what I've been working on this year is really iterating on what those things are that would be in my playbook, and being willing to kind of tweak them and adjust them by, as I said earlier, by the team's maturity level also. So I think if I could sit down with you in a year and say, okay, Nico, here's like my playbook for individual management, here's my playbook for team management, then I would say that's a good sign that I maybe am getting closer to that goal.
Fantastic. Brief dive down a rabbit hole. 5 years ago, you talked a little bit about some of the tools that you're using to help you sort of organize all the information and be able to present it back in a useful way to the CEO and the teams that you supported. Similar question, sort of how do you capture and analyze all this data in your world right now? How has that evolved?
The good news is I actually use the same systems we talked about on our last call. And now I've just got 5 years of practice with, I use Rome Research and lots of integrations with things like Zapier to pull things over and capture and organize them. The big wild card that I'm excited about is AI. And I'm mostly interested in it at the moment from an operational or business process perspective. So I think it is solving. I mean, this is a very nerdy deep hole.
Go for it.
But I will just say, if you think about how knowledge is organized, the challenge often is that the more friction it takes for people to get information into a system, the less information you will have, right?
Yeah.
But that friction is required often to organize the information that's going into the system. So if you just tell everybody on your team, here's a giant Google Doc, drop everything you're thinking into this Google Doc. 2 years ago, you might have gotten the maximum possible amount of information, but the least amount of comprehension about what any of that information means.
Right.
Or you could say, guys, here's a form to submit all your information. And then that form organizes all the information they're submitting. And all of a sudden, you get a lot more comprehension out of the data that you've got. But the friction of entering things into a form, we all know, is going to hurt. And it's going to hurt how much people actually put in there and how many people adopt it. So the unlock that I think we've gotten with AI is that it has kind of removed a bit of that friction from the front end and from the organizing of information.
Yeah.
So to use the simple analogy again, it's like everyone can just drop everything into a Google Doc. And then in theory, you can get AI to just run across that and make sense of it. Now, I think there's a lot to this and about how AI is organizing and vectoring information and how to use prompts. And it's a whole nother conversation to have. But I do think that is the future of doing what you asked me about, which is how do you collect data and make sense of it? I think ultimately that will be should be a very AI-driven process in order to really get the most out of it.
As you have strived toward being a 1% manager, I'm curious if there are any management beliefs that you've changed your mind on.
I think one is what I said, that different things matter at different moments. Mm-hmm. So I'm much more open now to when you have either a new person or a new team or you're taking a new direction, that the first 3 to 6 months need to be a lot more fluid. Mm-hmm. And there needs to be a lot of psychological safety for people in figuring things out. But at some point, you need to flip the switch and put some real structure and vision and expectations in place. So I would say that's one thing that's a little different. I think I would have thought, I did think that you kind of need to come right out of the gate with a lot of that structure. And today, I don't believe that's the case. So that's, for individuals and teams, I think that's true. I think the amount of time that we need to spend in order to be really, really good at individual and team management has changed. I don't think I would have said that it was 20% or more a while ago. And now I do really believe that is the case. And then I would say the last piece is probably that there is more value in consistency than possibly any other thing. So while it is important to be adaptable, being consistent about the way you talk to your teams and to individuals on those teams about what we're supposed to be doing and what our values are in those things is really, really important. It's something that my boss, our CEO, actually does a really good job of. Is he will really focus on the same things over and over and over again and really stick to those until they become more of a mantra. And, I've really tried to latch onto that myself too, and have to repeatedly refer to, the 3 values or principles that I've got for our team. Make sure that those are things that we're always thinking about, to be consistent about when we've set goals, with checking back in on those goals and how we're mapping to those goals. Just the consistency. I think people thrive with some amount of consistency. And like I said, it's not to be the mighty oak or the flimsy reed. Like, you have to be bamboo and be flexible, but you have to have something for people to hold on to in order to do their best work, I believe. And the more time they spend trying to figure stuff out, the less time they're spending doing what you want them to be doing. So, reducing some of that volatility, I think, is really critical. Whereas before, I would have just said, hire smart people, give them lots of space, see what happens. And I now I believe, like, if a smart person is spending 3 hours trying to find something that I, as a manager, could put a process in place to make sure it's right at their fingertips, I am wasting their time by doing that.
Yeah. One of our early guests, Karen Berardo, she's episode 9, as I recall. I don't know why I remember this, like, these are random bits of data, but she said something that changed the way I think about my day and for the last almost decade. And she said that the most important question she asks herself and her team is this the right next thing to work on? Just constantly checking and self-evaluating that. What's the most useful question that you ask your team?
Probably is does what we're doing matter? I think it's easy to get locked into doing the same things over and over again without asking the question of, does this really matter? Is this really moving the needle for us? It's probably, this is a bit of a stage dependent thing too, right? Yeah. So EIP is in the metabolizing phase, right? Like, we've gone through the growth phase, and now we've got, kind of headcount and the processes and all that stuff. Totally. And so there's a stage after where you start to optimize and figure out what to do. So I would say in this particular stage, the optimizing stage, the question is really, does it matter? And, we have a certain practice, for example, that we've had in place for, a few years. And in our last team meeting, we were talking through how it was going. And I could just tell from the way that people were talking about it that they actually did not think it mattered, and that it did not actually drive real value.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of made the space open to have that conversation, right? Like, do you guys think this matters? Is there a way to do this that might be better?
Yeah.
And just a willingness to, to take the axe to things that are not really moving the needle or really meaningful. So it's a similar question to the one that you were talking about. Is this the right next thing to work on? But I think it's reflecting a bit more of what we're already working on in some ways. Like, are all the things we're working on really meaningful?
Adam, I want to bridge over to something that you started before Tesla or EIP, the Clean Energy Leadership Institute. CELI also turns 10 this year, and it's become one of the most respected leadership pipelines in our sector, if I can say that on your behalf. What sparked the idea for CELI, and did you have any sense of how it would become so embedded in the culture of how clean energy has grown?
Well, what sparks it was, I was a 20-something analyst working at the Center for American Progress with my colleague, Jackie Weedman. And we were at that moment where Waxman Markey just had kind of blown up. And then Solyndra happened. And then there was just a string of just bad days, and what I was thinking about at that time was that, in 15 years, we will be at decision time for a lot of this stuff. It's kind of clear that the system today, the people in the system today are not able to get things done, the things that need to get done. And so in 15 years, it'll really be decision time. And so if you want, what kinds of people do you want in positions of influence in 15 years?
Yeah.
And how do you work backwards from that? And I think that's really where the idea came from. And so the idea then was, how do you identify where those people are right now? And so there was that part of it, find them. And then there was, what do you want them to know? And so in energy, our industry is kind of cool because you actually have to know a lot about a lot of different things to be successful at your job. So you have to know a little bit of engineering, a little bit of finance, a little bit of policy, there's a bunch of pieces to it. And so let's make sure we get people to understand all those different concepts. Let's make sure that those cohorts are also spread out across different industries and sectors, so that if you're 15 years from now, the CEO of a major solar company, you know how to call up some person who's working at one of the major lending institutions, for example. And then lastly, let's make sure that these are diverse cohorts. I mean, I would say at the time, there's a there is still very few women who are in the positions of leadership in the energy industry. And that still is kind of true today. It's not as bad. But so at first we had some guidelines like, okay, at least half the fellows we admit have to be women. And now I would say we've really expanded that to include racial and ethnic diversity, socioeconomic diversity, and political diversity, which I also think is super important to try to make sure that we've got truly heterogeneous cohorts of people.
Right.
And so that was where the idea came from. And obviously it's been unbelievable. And believe me, I wish I could take more credit, but I think the reason it's been so successful is because, one, we drink our own Kool-Aid, and we have the fellows, alumni, basically help run the next fellowship.
Right.
So that makes it really,
that's really
really
cool.
powerful and important. And then having a full-time staff who genuinely just like works their tails off. I mean, I cannot overemphasize how much work has gone in from the full-time staff as well.
Yeah.
To do all the like things that people don't know need to be done.
Yeah.
In order to make that space possible.
Yeah.
But it's been an amazing ride.
I want to give you a chance to shout out the most recent addition, the new executive director, and also what you and she believe is the next decade of CELI's impact in climate leadership.
Yeah. Well, first, I would be remiss if I didn't say a big thank you to our outgoing executive director, Esther Morales, who's amazing and is doing amazing work now that we're really, really proud of with the city of Oakland. And she's an example of what I was saying of just kind of the amount of tireless work that she put in over the last few years is a huge part of our success. We've been excited to welcome Rashenda Van Leeuwen in as our new executive director. She started, I think, 3 weeks ago.
Oh, man.
And I mean, what we've been talking about and thinking about, I would say at the meta level is about the workforce required for the energy transition.
Yes.
And that's really the problem that we are seeking to solve, is capacity building. And so I think our fellowship program is a key part of that. The other two important parts of that are going to be activating our alumni to make a big difference. Because we have this incredible alumni network, and how can we help them to be more? How can we provide more cohesion for that group and give them opportunities to make a big difference? And then the entry level side. So how do we get more people into the clean energy workforce at the top of the funnel? And I think that's another area where we really, really want to expand our programs and make sure that we are meeting people where they are at, because that's the hard picks and shovels work that needs to get done here. Is how do you go and find the people wherever they are who we want to get into the industry, rather than relying on the pathways to power that have existed for a long time. And that's where I guess a little bit of my like pump background comes into play. Like I do not trust or want to rely on existing institutions for solving this problem. And I think that that's part of what we're building, is a parallel track to get people into positions of influence to do good things with that.
Yeah.
And that would be the kind of big vision to have is how do we do that and really accelerate and the volume and quality and impact of that pipeline.
I really appreciate all that you've done for the industry through CELI, and I'm excited about what Rashenda is going to do to sort of take the baton from our friend Esther. Before we move on away from CELI, where can folks who are maybe hearing about it for the first time, or maybe hearing for the 10th time, and now they know this is something they need to do, where can they lean in and learn more about CELI?
Cleanenergyleaders.org.
Perfect. Cleanenergyleaders.org. Now you know. Don't get left behind. Adam, one of the many things that has certainly changed for both of us in the intervening 10 years is fatherhood. You not only have moved halfway across the country and back, but you have moved into another season in your life where you have something that's way more important than your career. And I wanted to just sort of get a sense for you of how that's affected you. How did becoming a father change the way that you make professional decisions, or even define something like a good week?
The first thing is that the way I spend my time has changed. For me, it's important to be with my family for dinner. And so if I'm not traveling somewhere else, if I'm not in a different city or state, And if I'm not at like a client dinner, I'm home for dinner. And I think that that's important, and going through that bedtime routine with the kids and just being present for that part. And I think that definitely has required a shifting mentality. And I've had to kind of ask myself, well, the extra hour that I feel like I need to do right now, how important is that? And we talked earlier in the interview about prioritization and the kind of the way that that priorities change. And I say this is where I've had to learn that lesson in the hardest way, which is that it's not just about prioritizing family and prioritizing time with family, but it's also about then what the consequences of that are, which means that I actually need to get a lot better at working with the time I have, picking what to work on, how to get things done efficiently. It forces delegation. It forces building better systems and structures to be more efficient.
Right.
And so I think it's really helped my professional life, actually, because it's pushed me to develop skills in the professional setting that I just wouldn't have otherwise. But I kind of had to get forced into doing that. I think otherwise I would have been somebody who just, as I said at the beginning of the conversation, was working until 3 a.m. to get everything done every single night. And I never would have to learn how to prioritize anything.
I can so identify with that. One of the things we learn, especially as parents, is how to set boundaries, guardrails, how to protect our calendar. I'm curious, what do you prioritize and protect on your calendar? How do you structure your day so that you can really ensure that your family gets the best of you?
Yeah, well, I mean, unfortunately, I leave pretty early. So I would say that my setup is more that I leave early, so I usually don't see my kids in the morning, and then I get back a little bit earlier as a result of that. And then I'm usually working from home 2 days a week, which means that on those days where I'm working from home, I am able to see them in the morning and help get them off to school. And then I really just take a critical eye towards travel and things that I need to do that are outside of the house. So, I don't feel like I have to go everywhere anymore. I mean, it is a bit tough, I would say, because I kind of miss the conference circuit. I'm a people person, and going to events and seeing people and connecting with people is actually one of the best parts of the job. And I've been a little bit off the conference circuit in the last few years because a lot of times those things are kind of, they're the thing that's getting this at the bottom of the priority list. And so I think one hit that I feel like I've experienced is that I have to work a lot harder to stay connected with people because I don't have the easy seeing everybody at a conference that I used to have earlier on in my career. So that's one example of where I think there's a price that gets paid, and I at least get very, it's not exactly insular, but I get very focused on the kind of working within my company rather than connecting with people outside. I think that's been one thing that I've noticed and I've actually been trying to work on this year. Setting up that one-on-one time to check back in with people. You and I caught up earlier this year. It's just doing that outreach because I'm not seeing people right on the circuit. And that takes more effort, but I've actually found that it's also sometimes more meaningful, right? Because bumping into someone at a conference, catching up, that's great. It's very serendipitous, but it means a lot more when I call you up and I say, Nico, it's been like a year, like let's chat. And then we get some good one-on-one time together. So it is possible to maintain relationships, but it does require more effort. But I think it's maybe leading to higher value, more meaningful relationships, even if it's fewer of them.
Can you see this?
Yeah. Wow.
How about this guy?
That's great. Yeah, it's taken me. So this was 13 years ago or something. Like that?
Well,
10 years ago.
It was exactly 10 years ago. This was unofficially. Well, you were still at GTM. This was RE Plus 2015. Unofficially, when we were launching, this was a month before we launched the podcast. This is you and your buddy Marco Krapels, before you ever worked together. And then, of course, there's Marco Garcia. But, this was, believe it or not, this was the industry trend stage. This was our first time. Or really second time, but this is the Laxa launch, and it was our first time. You can see Conergy and Nexttracker were sponsors hosting what would become effectively the Power Up Live stage. You were the first guest on what would become the Power Up Live stage. This is pretty funny too. Like this is me 10 years ago.
Yeah, it took us both 10 years to grow this facial hair,
to grow a beard. I know, and also to fill into our suit jackets. I think that another fun one here. This is my old boss, Sergio. I think this might be the closest I have been in 10 years to Eric Wessoff. Ironically, it's funny. But I saw this earlier and I thought, man, this just brings back so many memories, because this was effectively like we were launching the Latin American Caribbean Solar Alliance, and we were all just kids, man. Believe it or not, in this picture, although I look 20, I was 36. Anyway, I thought that would be a fun trip down memory lane.
That's great. Oh, man.
Yeah. Are there any other, as you reflect on just the ways that you've evolved, are there any simple or complex habits that have helped you stay present both with your work and with your family?
Yeah, I actually have one that probably cuts across both, and I'm not always amazing at this, but I would say phone down is a good one.
Yeah.
When I get home.
Okay.
I think maybe there's other people who have more self-control than I do, but if my phone is in my pocket, it's really hard to not check it and get sucked in. And so I would say putting the phone on the counter when I walk into the house, and so it's there, it's not in my pocket, so that I can actually be present for that time that I've got with them. And I experience the same thing with meetings. So it's one reason why in-person meetings, I think, have been helpful to get back to in-person meetings, because it limits those distractions and allows me to be present. And, when I think about the people who I admire the most and who I look up to the most, I actually have realized that a lot of what I admire so much about them is that when they are with you and they are talking to you and they are really there for that conversation. And I think that's important. That's important for our kids to know, right? That I'm not just that I'm not just stopping by. That when I am with you, I am really with you. I tend to think that kids remember impressions more than events. So, what is the impression that my sons or my daughter have of me? Is it that I was there, with them, emotionally there with them, more so than did I play a specific game with them where I was popping on and off my phone, even though they really liked the game, And I think other people professionally feel the same way. You know when I'm talking to you, but I'm also checking my phone every 2-3 minutes. I've got a few tabs open on my Zoom window and multiple screens at home, so I can have my email over there and Slack is popping things up, and I'm just not fully there, right? And so I think that's one habit. Again, I'm not great at it, but it is something that I really aspirationally keep in mind. Phone down, close the tabs, windows down, listen to what the person is saying, be present with them. And I think it's really hard to do your best work also. I kind of don't believe you can do your best work if you're not actually present. But you can get away with doing okay work without being present, probably, which is hard. Because we're in a very distracted time in human history, unfortunately.
It's so true. Yeah.
And the conference circuit, which we were just looking at those pictures, I think that I have a similar feeling about that, right? Like if you're at an event and you're talking to someone, but you're looking over their shoulder to see who else is coming in the room, like you're making a mistake, right? You're making a mistake. And it's not transactional. It's not because, you don't know that, you don't know where that person will go. It's more because like when you're with somebody, be with somebody, actually get to know them a little bit, build that relationship up. Business is always going to be secondary, right? To that. And I think the best people from a business standpoint are good at what they do because they want other people to be successful, at the end of the day. They want the other person to be successful. I don't really care about your company being successful, but I want you to be successful, right? And that's why I like partnerships work so much.
One of the things that I've learned through the forced silence of becoming a good interviewer, and I will accept the mantle of being a good interviewer because I've been through it. I've done so much work in that realm that I feel pretty confident now that I've learned to do it well. I'm just getting a call from my business partner, Josh. I swear I thought I had turned it off. This is hilarious. Now it's ringing in my ears and I can't find it. That's what's distracting me now. Hang on.
Yeah.
God, stupid WhatsApp. You're
gonna have to leave this in the. You're gonna have to leave this in the interview and me yelling at you.
It's funny, actually. I thought I had it on Do Not Disturb. Gosh. So where I wanted to go with that is, in the forced silence, I've learned exactly what you're saying, that it is so important to be able to look someone in the face, not over their shoulder in person, but in this world where we have probably 50+% of our communication now over something like Zoom, a web conference, which is, if I'm remembering correctly, we recorded our first recording on Skype. We couldn't use the video function because neither of our Wi-Fi or internet was good enough to provide us video and audio without it, breaking down. We've lost touch with the, so many folks are they're checking their email or whatever, they're missing some percentage of the conversation that if they were present, if you were present in that moment, you would move faster. There's a theory in running, and we're both runners, even if we don't get to do it as much anymore. But there are a couple of sports scientists down at Wofford College, I think, or maybe it's Furman in South Carolina. They wrote a book called Run Slow to Run Fast. And I've found that that's true over the 10 years as I've learned to slow down and meditate, slow down and be present with my kids. Like you, I leave my phone in my office. I don't take my phone out of my office in the evenings, like for dinner or whatever. I try, I'm not perfect at that, but we, from a very early age, said to our kids, hey, you have the prerogative at any time to say, hey, phone down, and especially at dinner. So it's pretty common these days that my wife more than I will get called out. Like we'll be at the table and the kids will say, phone down, Mom. And sometimes they'll say, put your phone in the bowl. And we've got a bowl in the middle of the table. Her phone goes in jail. And I think it's super important that we learn to put those boundaries, especially around work. And what I've found, my friend Scott Muller shared this with me, and it keeps coming back up, that there's this science studies that show that, to your point, your children remember that they have this sense of time with you, not a specific memory of things with you. They have a shared sense that they were with you and present with you, rather than, I remember that time we went to the thing. And a lot of parents get it wrong. And by the way, this continues into adulthood. I don't remember I want to finish that thought. So the science suggests that you need between 9 and 15 minutes a day. Like, let's not get clinical, but try to get 10 minutes of direct FaceTime uninterrupted with each one of your children. That might sound simple. I have 3 children. Finding 10 to 15 minutes uninterrupted where I can, if he so chooses, I can stare into his eyes and just look at him, listen to his songs, ask him questions, whatever he wants to do, where it's his prerogative to tell me what's the priority. Man, that's a harder challenge than finding time to meditate, harder challenge than going to bed and getting up at the same time. But it has made all the difference in my children's shared sense that dad is present. Yeah. I think that's really important. And I was going to say, it does extend into adulthood. And I'd love to hear if you're finding any similarities in management style. We mentioned earlier that you're seeking to be in that 1%, top 1% of managers. Like, how does that correlate to how we think about being present in the workplace as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think both are true. It is a cross-cutting truth. So, this is just about people. It's not really about kids at all.
Yeah.
We talked earlier about my kind of belief about management and really about anything, which is that you just can't really get good at it without spending time on it. We don't need to go down the whole Malcolm Gladwell, how many hours do you need to do? It's but you cannot possibly get good at something without spending real time on it. And I would say once you've committed a certain amount of time to something, the next question is, how intentional are you with that time? And so, fitness is kind of the same way if you think about it. So you need to spend a certain amount of time in the gym to get physically fit. And if you can start by just doing that, by consistently being there for an hour a day, that is definitely good progress, right? But then you start to learn about how to spend your time in the gym so you can make the most of that 1 hour and do it in a really intentional way. And that's what you need in order to grow, right? And so I think that is basically true everywhere else. So when it comes to management, if you're not literally spending the first, the equivalent of the hour a day on that, you're not even showing up. So you can't really be that good at it, right? It's like not going to the gym ever, and then suddenly someone's like, "Hey, Adam, can you just do a 100-yard sprint right now with zero training?" And it's going to be hard to do that. So if you're in a management context, if you've spent zero time training, and then all of a sudden you have an employee issue or something pops up, it's really, really difficult to rise to that occasion. Maybe you can do it, but you're probably going to pull some muscles and hurt yourself, and it's not going to be the greatest experience. So that consistency in the time spent is really important. And then shifting into that mentality of how can I intentionally spend that time? So I'm going to block out that time to become and build great management. How can I actually spend it? And that's where it's very similar principles to physical fitness. What is my framework? How do I measure progress? Have I read about the different perspectives on how to do this? Have I found the one that feels like it matches me the most? Do I know what I'm aspiring to? And you don't have to be able to answer all those questions, but I think you got to be at least asking those questions. And like my fitness journey has been very similar. My first year was kind of a big waste of time because I was doing a lot of things that weren't really very well optimized, but I was showing up really consistently, and I was putting in the time to also try to understand it better. And then year 2, I think was genuinely much better because I'd done some of the work to understand what was out there and how it matched my experience. So I'd say all of that is true, and it's going to come as a huge shock. But guess what? Like parenting is kind of the same, So you have to show up, right? It's great to show up and be there, kind of clock the time. But then how can I be more intentional with that time? And with kids, it's only simpler because it is truly just about being really present for them. But whereas in other parts of life, there's more nuance to it probably than that.
So you've moved through a bunch of sort of distinct seasons from GTM where we met to Solar City Tesla, CELI, and EIP, now fatherhood joined in with that. I'm curious if you have any thoughts around the pace and signals in your life that tell you when to simplify, consolidate versus push, scale. Like how do you think about those micro seasons that you now have to lean into as a partner in a business?
Yeah. I mean, it's been a theme of our conversation, but I would say that the thing that I have tried to get a little better at is just the balance between the flexibility and being rigid. So you need to have some amount of consistency to grow in any area of your life. And you have to have, and by consistency, I also mean you have to have some stable variables. You have to have some things that you continue to do, and whether that's you're managing a team and you have to give them consistent messaging about what the vision is, whether that's at home, with you have to have a consistent parenting strategy, because if you switch it up every week, like newsflash, that's not going to work. Or, when it comes to fitness, if you try a new routine every week, that's not really going to work. So you do have to have some amount of consistency, but you also have to be adaptable because different moments are different. Teams are different at different times. The company is different at different times. Priorities shift with your kids. They grow up. I tend to have been have these moments where I'm like, wow, I've totally figured things out as a parent. When in reality, my children have just grown up a tiny bit more. And so they just the things that I was trying to do a month ago no longer are really that necessary. And I get a whole new set of challenges. So it's, how do you just be like bamboo, right? Be flexible enough to kind of move with what's going on in the world without totally losing your rooting, in what's going on, and having some amount of consistency. I'd say that if there's anything that you can get, not that you necessarily will get, but anything that you can get from experience, it's just a sense of that, of where to push, where to pull back, where to change, where to hold a little bit firmer. But it's like the Ted Lasso thing. I think you got to kind of be curious too, so you have to be willing to look at things and really ask yourselves those questions. But there's no firm rule about where and how to do those things, I don't think.
I wonder if there's a leadership principle that you hope your kids absorb through watching you, perhaps even your team as well.
It's probably just to help other people to be successful and do their best work. I think that's really probably at the core of what I believe. And, this isn't exactly kind of a great necessarily corporate principle, but I do just tell the people who work for me that I want them to be successful, whether or not it's at our company and that I am invested in them and in their careers. And normally what I say is, I'm going to work very hard with you to put you in the best possible spot so that when I bring you an offer to get promoted here, you can either take that or go somewhere else to be very successful. And I will try to win you back, right, in that moment and make sure that you want to stay here and that you want to do the work here. But I want to put you in a position where you could say no to me and still be successful. And so again, that's not a great corporate principle, probably, because it's creating optionality for the people who work for you. But I do just kind of fundamentally believe in that, and I think the same thing is really true for my kids. You can't make somebody successful. That's not, it's not possible to do that. But you can create the conditions for success. And I think that's the way that I think about parenting too. Even now they are having to make their own decisions. Right? I cannot make the decisions for them. I can't protect them from everything in the world, but I can try to create the conditions for success and put them in a spot where they can do that. And I hope that is what they pick up from the whole thing. Kind of like plants, I cannot make plants grow, but you can put them in good soil. You can water. You can give it sunlight. You can create the conditions where a plant can grow, and that's what the hope would probably be across all those areas of my life.
Adam, you were the first guest 10 years ago on the show, and so I thought that it would be fitting, it feels only right, if I give you over the mic for the last 10 or so minutes before we wrap up, in case you have questions for me.
So you've had your business going and growing for 10 years, changed a lot, become a full-time thing. A lot of things have changed, but what I'm curious about is, what would you today say to the Nico of maybe it was 8 years ago, 9 years ago, who was filled with doubt about launching a business?
Nico 8 years ago had good reason to have doubts. And I think that often you'll hear these sort of trite, at least the recipient reading it through LinkedIn posts would think, oh gosh, another person who never failed. No, I failed a lot. I've heard folks say, like, if you knew how hard it would be or how much it would cost you, you wouldn't do it. So in some ways, I wouldn't, even knowing what I know now, there are things that I don't think I would tell myself about what's coming. I'd have some very specific investment advice, where not to put time and effort and money. Ultimately, Adam, the thing that Nico 8 years ago needed to hear most was, you need to trust people more. There's a lot of, I've spent the better part of the last 5 years just undoing the trauma of my early life that created some pretty high walls around my that are psychological safety. It's been very difficult for me to build a team around me. There are two people, Herman, who's amazing. I've worked with him now for I think 4 years, and Chris, who has been with me since episode 80 something. I feel so coming up on 800 episodes. That have been with me the longest. And I've had folks stick around and work with me for 2, 3, 4 years. But it's been hard to see people through seasons, as you were just pointing out. And I would probably coach myself to recognize that people will come and go, and that's okay. And they will leave their mark on the business or not, and that's okay. And that my job is to help them find the best in themselves. And that's really hard to do when you're still not sure who the best of yourself is. So I find that it's really hard as a leader to feel like a leader when you still feel vulnerable and insecure and uncertain. So the Nico 8 years ago, who very much thought that like the goal was grow huge podcasts, build big audience, watch money come in, he might be disappointed that the way that happened is very, very different, right? So I would caution him to be open to understanding that you don't really know what seeds are being planted. You don't know if they're peppers or cucumbers. But if you tend that garden, then like every garden, not only does it give you nourishment and sustenance, but it can feed others. And probably the greatest joy of any small business that makes it past 5 years is knowing that not only have the work we've done nourished others metaphorically, but we've literally fed dozens of families for many, many months at a time. And that, that is encouragement. I would say to him, your instinct is absolutely right that this medium of podcast is one of the most powerful ways to open doors and hearts and minds. So don't give up on it. Just know that it will pay off. And I say that to folks all the time now who are asking themselves, is it too late to start a podcast? Is it too saturated? People misunderstand that not most podcasts are not Joe Rogan podcasts. Most podcasts have an audience of 100 to 200 faithful listeners, if they're lucky. And that's okay. I used to show a picture to sponsors when I was reaching out early days of a big stadium. And I think this is helpful perspective. And it was a picture that had a red box around 400 seats. And when I first started out, we were getting about 400 downloads an episode, which at the time was actually pretty good. My podcast friends were like, wow, that's pretty impressive. Like, you're on your way. But I'm in marketing, and I would email sponsors like Enphase, and I would say, hey, by the way, you go to all these trade shows like RE Plus Northeast and like the various conferences, Energy Year and others down in Latin America, where we all know as marketers that the max attendance is 500. You put 2 to 3 bodies there. You spend $10,000 to $15,000 just mobilizing position to be in front of 500 people. This is what it looks like inside of a stadium to seat 500 people in the same place. By the way, if you want to reach that many people each and every week, I get that many listeners in your target audience, Latin America at the time, every week on my podcast, 400 to 500 listeners. And that mental switch for them, they were like, wait, are you serious? Like that, it's that easy to get in their ear every week, not once a month. And by the way, you're spending $15,000 for the hope that they might swing by, they might see your logo, they might engage in a conversation. You're really getting less than 10% conversion in impressions there from a marketing perspective. So I would encourage that, Nico, to double down on that philosophy, and also to not the one mistake I made was that there was a big gap where I really lost belief in myself after I got laid off at Conergy from November 18th, 2016 to about November of 2017. So that year I didn't do anything, and that was catastrophic in the medium term because I lost momentum. And momentum is really hard to get back. I did get it back, and I'm grateful for it. But I would be so much further ahead because things are logarithmic in the way growth happens.
What is the main thing that you want your listeners to feel or take away from your show in an overarching way? Because I sense that you have a particular kind of philosophy, actually, like certain messages that you want people to be consistently pulling out of your podcast, regardless of who the guest is. What is that message?
It is multivariate. On the surface, it is that these people are normal people who have normal problems just like you. Therefore, if they can do it, you can too. That is the simplest, highest message that I want people to get. The reason that I pull back the veil is because it turns out that none of these people are, well, not none. Most of these people are not smarter than us. They're not better than us. They're not more well-positioned than us. They are doggedly determined. They have great ideas. They have excellent timing, and not always. And they have increased the surface area of luck. From the very beginning, it became very apparent to me, you and I were talking, that like we get to see inside the box, pull back the veil all the time, and we see people being very vulnerable about their fears and failures. And I knew this medium would provide the platform to do that. And I said it from the very beginning that I wanted people to feel like they were sitting on a bar stool at a bar, like eavesdropping on a conversation between us at one of the trade shows. And I think like 4 or 5 episodes in, Paul Grana messaged me. He's like, dude, I feel like I'm sitting on a bar stool eavesdropping on a phone call, on a conversation at a bar during RE Plus with you guys. Like, this is wild. And I was like, man, that was the first time in my life where I was like, okay, the thing I wanted, and it manifests in real time, in real life, right? So that's number 2. I want you to feel like it's so intimate and vulnerable and close to in proximity to how you would be in conversation with this person, that you feel like you get to know them. And then I think the third is at the macro industry level. I want people to recognize that how we're building this industry is how all industry is built. How we're building each individual company is how all startups happen. The way that we invest in this sector is not different from how healthcare works. And lastly, there is no us versus them. This facade that somehow there's fossil fuel and clean energy, it's all energy. We are standing on the shoulders of giants right now who built the entire infrastructure of our planet that is called modern industrial complex on our discovery that we can burn what the sun has produced millions of years ago now and harness that power. We've just found new ways to make it cleaner and better. And we have to transition. That's why we call it the energy transition. I think that's the final message that I want people to remember is there's so much demonizing of the fossil industry, and we can't get there without recognizing where we came from and without realizing that they, by the way, are by far the deepest pockets and the best potential investors in the economic energy future that we all believe is possible.
Awesome. Well, thanks for letting me turn the tables for a few minutes. Those were really good answers. And I would just, I'm going to mess up this quote, but there's somebody who says something along the lines of the best authors write books that they themselves would want to read. And I think your answer to the second question in a way is just another way of answering the first, which is it seems like you just built a podcast to send the messages that you wish you had gotten earlier, which is pretty cool.
It's really true.
So
yeah,
you're sending something, it's like you're sending things back in time, which is neat.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Adam, for coming along this journey with me. It's full circle 10 years later. First conversation nudged me really to start on this journey, and I'm grateful that we're still learning out loud together. I appreciate you.
Thanks for having me. Great to see you, Nico.
Always. We'll have you back again in another 500 episodes.
Looking forward to it.
Hey, thank you for joining us again for this 10th anniversary celebration. If you are checking your notes, yes, we turned 10 years old on October 6th, my birthday. Thank you for all of you who reached out and said not only happy birthday, but happy anniversary. We will again next year, 11, and many years to come. We believe that the message that we're communicating here on SunCast is important. You have told us that it resonates. So thank you for that. And hey, if you're looking for more than just a weekly episode, if you're trying to find a trusted circle of industry peers to compare notes, get unstuck, grow together, I would love for you to consider one of the things that is an evolution of SunCast. We call it Power Circle. It's a private peer community for clean energy leaders. We'll be sharing more details on how you can apply. And I would encourage you for now, stay connected at suncast.media. Make sure you're subscribed to our email newsletter so that not only you won't miss each week when we drop a new episode just like this twice a week, but I can give you a heads up as we launch Power Circle, and you can learn more about it. We've just completed our first SunCast Summit, where our first official, unofficial Power Circle gathering was absolutely phenomenal. One of the most intense, vulnerable, and amazing groups of people I've had the privilege of spending time with. We're going to do more of that because I think that getting together in person in small groups, getting together online a couple of times or once a month in small groups is also really important. We're here to help you sharpen the saw. We've been doing it for a decade and we're not slowing down. And before I sign off on this anniversary episode, I would love to say a special thank you to all those who have helped make this podcast possible for the last decade. I mentioned Chris and Herman, my two longest standing teammates. Genuinely appreciate all of the work that you two have put in to help us get this podcast out each and every week, twice a week, sometimes more. Thank you to Jeremy Pingle, our operations director, my right hand. I genuinely couldn't run this business without Jeremy's support. To all of the many, many team members who have come and gone all the way back. I'm thinking to Alex Murillo, Glenda Johnson, Ludovic Maillard, Graham Whitley. So many folks that have been such a huge contributor. Brittany, Artem, folks that have helped us lift this vision out of the dirt, sometimes out of the mud. It takes a village to raise a family, to raise a business. And it's not lost on me that to have made it through as a business, making money for 10 years, puts us in the less than 1/10 of 1%, the top point decile. I don't know what Josh Beck, I'm sure, would have a better word to say. Josh Beck, thank you for coming alongside all of the guests who've been on the show, not just those who've been on as executive profile guests, but even those who've been a part of our stages. Thank you. Thank you for believing in the SunCast platform. Thank you for wanting to have your story told in our particular unique method and way. Thank you for trusting me with your voice. Thank you for trusting us with your message. Thank you to every single sponsor, from InPhase, our first sponsor, all the way through to CPS, our current sponsor, and everyone else. You can find them easily at suncast.media/sponsor. Of course, we list all of the sponsors that we have worked with through the years. So many of you have helped pay the bills and keep the lights on so that I only have to ask our listeners to pay attention. Thank you. To John Bonanno, my advisor and friend who has been along for this ride for so long, since long before SunCast was even a thought. Thank you for your steady hand, calm reassurance. And last, certainly not least, to my children and my wife for their unending patience, for the many nights that I stayed up long after they went to bed and got up long before they did to bring this vision to life. Thank you for believing in me and reminding me that I am more than this podcast. And thank you, dear listener, dear viewer, for tuning in. Without you, this show doesn't exist. I sometimes feel as though I am speaking into the void, and you quietly remind me with your downloads, with your messages, and with your in-person high fives and hugs that this matters. Thank you. I appreciate you. I'm Nico Johnson, and I want to remind you that you are what you listen to, who you listen to, who you surround yourself with. Thanks again for showing up, Solar Warrior. It's half the battle.